Ow! Oof, pardon me. Ow. Excuse me. Sorry. Ow, my toes. Pardon. Jeez. Wow. I knew the summer jamboree would be popular, but I didn't expect it to be quite this crowded. It really is amazing what they managed to do, don't you think? Huh? You aren't sure who I'm referring to? Oh, that's right. You haven't been to one of these events before, have you? This big beach party we're at was hosted by none other than the Eorzean Event Committee. They're a really cool group of people who are dedicated to hosting amazing events all across the realm, but they operate outside of the yearly festivals and outside of the Grand Company events. So in that sense, they're rather unique. In fact, the members of the committee are all from different free companies as well. They put on several events like this throughout the year. One of the members is a regular at the cafe. I'm sure you've seen them around before, though they did talk about dropping in later tonight. Why don't you come by and meet them then? Ah, good evening. I hope you aren't too sunburnt. I'm sad to say that after yesterday, my neck is doing an amazing impression of a ruby tomato. My personal bit of pain aside, however, the guest I told you about should be here shortly. Why not relax while we wait for them to arrive? Aha! There you are! Talan Jeanne. Welcome to the cafe. How are you today?
Thank you, and doing quite well.
Now, for those that don't know my guest, he is part of the Eorzean Event Committee, as I said earlier. But not only that, is fairly well known across our data center for a number of roleplay related reasons that we will get into later in the episode. Now, full disclosure, I actually had a bit of an issue getting you on the podcast because you're involved in so many different things that I was trying to figure out what exactly I wanted to have you on the podcast for, and we finally figured something out.
True
So
enough,
I
though
am
it
very
was
happy.
chance.
What?
True enough, though it was also sheer chance, as you may have ended up interviewing my one of my fellow coordinators.
Very true. But hey, coincidences happen, and I am not going to look a gift horse in the mouth. So, as you know, this is Coffee and Carbuncles. I start every episode by asking, what are you drinking today?
Well, I'm going to admit I'm being a complete and absolute savage and drinking Pepsi Max directly from a bottle.
Is that something you do often?
It might be, yes.
I have a double spiced chai, which is not something I normally drink while doing these recordings, but I'm thinking for this episode, instead of coffee and carbuncles, Talan and tea. Or Talan and chai, if you will.
I will admit, when it does come to tea, I prefer chai over any other kind.
Oh, it's delicious. In general, are you more of like a tea or a coffee drinker? Where do you sort of fall into that spectrum?
A little of both, honestly. If I have coffee, I personally prefer a bit of mocha, and if I have tea, ultimately I will prefer to either have herbal tea or proper chai, as thankfully I'm lucky enough to live somewhere where there are plenty of Indian restaurants, and I can easily get hold of real chai tea.
Now, obviously, we have different accents. I'm sure this is very startling to some of the listeners. But why don't you go ahead and tell everyone where you're from? Tell us about your background.
I don't really know quite what to tell about the background, but if it isn't at all obvious from my accent, I am indeed from the UK. Beyond that, as I say, I'm not really sure what to say quite about background. I just know that when it comes to the Aether Data Center, I'm one of the few rare English role players that we have. There aren't that many of us, especially not when it comes to being coordinators and admins and things like that. Rare breed.
The neat thing that I like about Aether Data Center is someone pointed out to me that before the EU servers got established, there were a lot of Europeans that used this data center, I believe because of Gilgamesh. So we actually have quite a few, I know Germans, we have quite a few Germans on the data center. And I've met several British friends Some of them are still in the data center because that's just where they've always been, but I know some of them moved over to, I believe, Crystal.
Well, interestingly enough, you mentioned Gilgamesh. That is where I'm from, after all.
I will take that as a background. All right, so before we jump into 14 stuff, obviously, any hobbies that you want to share about yourself or anything you want people to know before we focus on 14?
That's a very good question. I'm never good at just talking about myself. Hobbies, I suppose, quite a wide range, including obviously writing. If I didn't like that, I probably wouldn't be role playing in the first place. But also things like drawing, cooking, singing is a major one as well. That's one I particularly take pride in, honestly. One of the few hobbies I consider myself actually good at.
Any specific style of music or anything when it comes to singing?
Variable. I personally will like a lot of sort of rock ballads, but I also have been known to sing a lot of musical sort of things. As a vocal exercise, I like to take the last song from the Phantom of the Opera and sing all the parts.
So I have to ask, you're in the car, you're going along, you're singing, should I be imagining you doing like rock power ballads or more like off-Broadway stuff?
Either or. Although most of the time, given that in said car I would be the passenger, it would rather depend on who I was with.
That makes sense. Do people usually just let you go ahead and sing, or do they join in, hopefully, or?
That, again, would depend on who I was with. The most likely people who would be likely to join in with singing would be someone like my father, and I really wish that he wouldn't.
Ooh. Well, with any luck, hopefully he won't hear that. And if he does, don't hold it against the show. That wasn't me.
Oh, I've made it clear to him before anyway, don't you worry. It's not that he can't sing, he can. He just tries to sing in the wrong pitch, and it doesn't work.
Aw. Well, I mean, hopefully someday he will pitch correct.
One day. We can hope.
So, actually, before we jump into 14, you also mentioned cooking.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any type of food that you really enjoy cooking? And as a follow-up, do you own the Final Fantasy XIV cookbook?
Well, any particular type of food I enjoy, variable on that. I particularly enjoy exploring world cuisine, honestly. So looking at recipes from all sorts of different countries is interesting to me. And as to whether I have the 14 cookbook, very much so. I pre-ordered it, and there were some issues with the pre-orders in England. We had to wait quite a while, to the point where they gave us free credit for the delay.
Oh, wow. Have you cooked anything out of it yet?
Not as of yet, although I technically made one of the in-game recipes long before that cookbook existed, as on the EU side of things, they hosted a cooking contest at one point. I
Neat.
chose to make the pastry fish. I still have pictures of that to this day.
Post-interview, could you actually send me those pictures? Because I'm very curious to see them now.
By all means.
Now that we've started talking about the pastry fish, tell me what brought you to 14? What made you decide to give it and the pastry fish a try?
Well, that one's an easy one, because what actually brought me to 14 was one of my roleplay partners. Because I was actually quite reluctant to play 14 originally, given the things like the Moogles and a lot of the cutesy aspects were really quite a turn off for me in regards to Final Fantasy. But my roleplay partner of the time, we were both playing The Secret World, decided that she wanted to come over to here, and so, well, I came over with her.
That's interesting. I don't often hear people talk about, disliking Moogles or not having a wide background when it comes to Final Fantasy. Did it take a lot of convincing, or is this a pretty trusted roleplay partner and you were like, yeah, well, I guess I'll give it a shot?
She was a very trusted roleplay partner. I am still friends with her. Goodness, it's got to be about 12 years now, 12 years later. So
your you're kind of skeptical. You're hopping into this MMO. Tell me, what was the start of it like? How did you end up choosing your class? Because I know a lot of people seem to pick their class based off of Final Fantasy characters they like from the franchise, but it sounds like you were coming in with pretty fresh eyes about the whole thing.
Well, part of the original basis of us moving to this game was that because the Secret World was set in modern day, we could do a lot of what we referred to as meta RP, which meant we could roleplay as our characters playing another game. So that was the original concept that we were going to be going with. And so I picked my first character and my first class based on what my character from that game would have picked.
And what were those?
The character I ended up making was a Mikote because my roleplay partners was a Mikote. And the class that I picked was Gladiator Paladin.
And so when did you start liking 14? When you got in, did you enjoy it more than you expected to, or did it sort of take a bit to warm up to the game?
I'd say I enjoyed the gameplay regardless. It took a while to warm up to actually role-playing in this game.
And at what point, I guess, how long had you been playing it before the character that I think most people know you for comes into existence?
See, the character I was playing originally was not the character I am now. The character I was playing originally was Ekaya Noon. And that character, maybe, goodness, somewhere within that first month of playing was when I first started to roleplay them a little bit.
So you talked about joining 14 for roleplay reasons.
Mm-hmm.
When you came into 14, I imagine it was you and your friend exclusively role-playing together. When did you first hear about or decide to try outside roleplay, like going to, for instance, hosted events?
So it wasn't originally just me and my friend role-playing together because, let's say, it was meta RP, the idea that we'd be playing it as our characters. We could technically still do other sort of roleplay immediately. It's a sort of layered situation. I don't remember exactly when we first started going to events, but I'm fairly sure she was the one who found out about them at the time, and we went to them. At the time, her husband also was playing, so we had our own little FC together, which at the time was the Black Sails, a group of privateers who were based in the desert and had no ship whatsoever.
Oh my gosh, I need more details about this. What?
As I say, we had a privateer company who were based in the Goblet, and we did not have a ship. It was something we maintained throughout most of playing as that FC. This concept of privateers, or well, pirates really, who did not have a ship whatsoever.
Canonically, how do you guys end up viewing Limsa then, who actually, are pirates with ships?
We spent some time in Limsa. It varied really. The thing is, we were never super serious. We could still, play along with a lot of things and roleplay with people easily, but we always had that little air of not being fully serious about everything, not taking ourselves too seriously. I will admit that is something I've tried to maintain in all of my role-playing in this game and any FC in this game ever since, not taking ourselves too seriously.
Did you said in the Goblet, so I assume you had a free company house.
Indeed.
How did you guys choose to decorate it then? Was there a lot of stuff from Limsa, or just like a random ship wheel on the wall and the big shark head you can buy?
I mean, at the time, the shark head didn't exist when we first got an FC house. We had a Riviera styled sort of upstairs, and there were definitely piratical sort of elements to the decoration.
So it sounds like you definitely had a solid concept going in. When does your current character pop up?
Goodness. My current character was the original concept behind my current character was to be a black market merchant. That changed a little bit after I eventually really started to roleplay the character. My current character was created apparently in June 2014. I started playing in February 2014, so the character came about not that long after I started playing, actually, but was originally just a sort of NPC character as at the time we were doing these Aleport bazaars that we started hosting every other month, and the idea of being able to sell sort of more black market items was interesting to me, sounded fun.
And what, I guess, do you in character consider black market items, or do you just consider that as, for instance, having a private market as opposed to what's in the city-states?
That can be anything. A lot of the time, people will consider black market items to be anything that might be a little bit more questionable, that would probably not be allowed as general purchase. And of course, the most common one people like to roleplay for black market concepts is Moko, the old Eorzean version of cannabis.
That makes a lot of sense. I was also thinking of, from ARR, some of the blood-covered weapon components that you get to craft certain weapons from those later on. I don't exactly see those being on display at a stall in Limsa.
Interestingly enough, those have never come up as an option, but I could definitely see that, yes.
Really? That's surprising to me.
With that thought, I would say I would encourage anyone who ever decides to come sell at a shady market, someone bring those, please. That would be a very good idea.
So, when did event planning come about for you? Like, when did you decide to go from role playing and attending events to, hey, let's put on one of our own?
See, I don't know the exact date, I must admit. All I know is it must have been somewhere between that February and June, because, as I say, the Aleport Bazaar was clearly the catalyst for making my current character. And the Aleport Bazaar was something that RFC hosted as an every other month sort of deal. And though a lot of people of the time will have credited Adelar Stone, one of our old FC members, as being the person behind it, he was more the figurehead, the face. I was the one who was doing the actual planning of the event, to the point where there was a lot of graphical work drawn up, a lot of documentation for it, a lot of planning in those.
So tell us more about this Aleport Bazaar. Is it basically just your free company hanging out in character, telling people, hey, we'll be here at this time. If you want to come buy a few items, come give roleplay a shot?
Well, we took over the bar there and were sort of manning the bar. And then we had a couple of characters that we had who were able to do things like selling stuff. At the time, my character there was a goldsmith, so it was easy enough to sell items. And we were encouraging other people in the Gilgamesh role-playing community to come along and sell as well. And also outside of the role-playing community, if people weren't role players and wanted to come by and play along with us, sell real items and for Gil, buy items for Gil, or just come up with roleplay items as well, everyone was welcome. It was just a fun little thing.
A lot of fun.
It was genuinely a lot of fun, and that honestly was the precursor for a lot of the festival events that we do now. The idea of selling that sort of thing in that little market like that.
And we're going to talk about that after the break. We're really going to dive into specifically what you do in terms of the roleplay stuff you're involved with, but also more heavily into the Eorzean Event Committee. Because I want to get into the wide range of events that you guys host. And also some of the things that I feel make them very unique. So we will take a brief break, and when we come back, we will dive into part 2 of our interview in regards to the Eorzean Event Committee. Hello and welcome back to the second half of my interview with Talan Jeanne. Talan, welcome back.
Thank you.
All right, now before we get into our discussion about the Eorzean Event Committee, I want to talk about your background with RP a bit. You're involved in so many projects, and like I said at the start of the episode, I even had issues figuring out what I wanted to have you on to talk about. I literally almost just had an episode introducing you and just talking about the myriad of things you're involved in. Why don't you tell the listeners about some of the projects that you either run yourself or help organize?
Well, my list of projects at this current point in time is a lot smaller than it used to be. It's a smaller load. There are still certain ones that are on the back burner that are ideas to potentially pick up and try to introduce again. Ideas for those include things like there was a concept for a newspaper. Goodness, that moment when I'm trying to remember what on earth it was. Yeah, the Dapper Raptor was going to be the newspaper. The idea was to have a very in-character set sort of newspaper, and Chompy would be the mascot of that newspaper. He is a perpetually baby raptor, relatively well known, at least in the Gilgamesh role-playing community, if not in slightly wider circles. One of the other ideas that was on the back burner and could one day come into fruition again is the Eorzean Wrestling Federation, which is exactly what it sounds like. We did actually have a match for the Eorzean Wrestling Federation at one of our events one time. It seemed to go down pretty well. People absolutely hated the heel, as they should. Let's see, other projects.
If you ever want to do more with that, I can contact the roaster, and we will come to Gilgamesh and gather some PvPers, and we can make that a thing.
I mean, it's a little bit more complex than just PvPers, but I am definitely not against trying to make these things actually a thing again. It would be quite fun. It's definitely a little bit more based on professional wrestling, so more storytelling to a degree than the actual fighting.
You would be surprised how many PvPers have like full characters, backstory, heel versus hero, all of that pre-plotted. So we can definitely make this a thing.
Interesting. So I imagine I would be surprised at how much that actually is the case. I do at least know some good announcers as well, if ever that should happen.
All right.
And some people who might be happy to host and happen to have a not exactly a fighting ring. It's more of a hell in a cage sort of fighting ring, but still, they have an arena.
All right, EWF possibly coming soon. Anyway, sorry, continue.
Well, I was going to say some of the other projects that I have been involved in was one of them was the Aether RP library while that existed, which was similar to a lot of the RP hubs, but was aimed specifically at beginning players, newer players, and was designed sort of to help people who were new to things get involved. That was one of the projects I was quite heavily involved with. I was one of the main admins with that. I've had some involvement with the Aether Light District. I've had, other things that I've helped with. There was definitely some communication with the other data centers in trying to set up certain efforts between them, alongside setting up calendars. I have been and still am an admin on the Gilgamesh RP Hub for many years at this point. I was one of the founding members of the Aether RP Hub and was an admin on there for a very long time. As it is, I still run the calendar there. And my main, perhaps my pet project almost, is the Eorzean Black Market, which oddly enough existed even before the Aether Hub did, although not before the Gilgamesh Hub. It has existed since, I believe it's either the end of 2018 or the beginning of 2019. And the idea behind that was that a lot of the time, Gilgamesh at the time, since we had no world travel, but all the time I was seeing that when it came to villainous characters, players for villainous characters would be persecuted a lot. Characters that were villainous would be defeated very quickly because people playing hero characters would be overzealous about things. And when people did play villain characters, a lot of them were what I would refer to as Saturday morning cartoon villains. Very much the "Mwahaha, I am doing evil things because I am evil." And no real layers, nothing, no structure to that, nothing actually really interesting about that character whatsoever. So it was the idea that perhaps we could have somewhere that people who wanted to play those characters could band together, we could work on something a little bit more interesting, and we could get support when we had people who were being overzealous about being heroic characters.
And so what did this group of ne'er-do-wells end up doing? I mean, tell me about the RP interactions between you all.
There's been various sorts of things. A lot of it ended up focusing especially on the criminal side of things rather than the outright villainous, which was quite interesting to see a lot of the sort of criminal elements, a lot of the black market concepts overall. There's been various little plots that different people have been involved in. The place itself has evolved to being it is a community Discord. It is a place that there is a lot of out of character conversation and hangout between people. It has also, interestingly enough, evolved to be a highly LGBT place, completely by accident. Never was intended, but it is incredibly LGBTQ+. It's also a place that if people do want to find villainous characters and criminal characters for things, they can come on by and ask for people to help out with their plots and things like that. People are quite willing to do that sort of thing.
And you know, that's a common thread that I've found amongst a lot of my guests, and either the Discords they themselves run or Discords and groups that are part of N14 is there are people who say that they don't know where to start with roleplay, or they have ideas but they're nervous about putting them into action. And I think that pretty much anywhere you look, if people are role-playing, then I think most of the time you're also going to find them being willing to help others with their role-playing as well. Because I think it's an effort to not only enjoy role-playing, but expand the community of people who enjoy role-playing as well.
Very much so, yes. I would say we ourselves are always incredibly open to new players and always willing to help new players as well. It's always the best thing is when we get someone who's brand new who joins in and has fun with something and wants to come back and continue. Sometimes we've had trolls who end up getting involved with an event, especially when we've hosted shady markets. We've directly dealt with trolls, as some of our shady markets have been hosted in places such as in Pearl Lane, in Uldar, and we've hosted ones in the center of Limsa before as well. Quite a brave thing to do for an RP event, really. And when there have been trolls, we've reacted with roleplay and kind of incorporated them into things. For some of those trolls, that ended up getting them interested in roleplay, which is quite an achievement, really.
I think that's a really neat way to go about it.
I've usually found it's best to incorporate them. Sometimes a troll might freeze up and decide, nope, I don't know how to interact, and they'll just leave. Sometimes they'll join in. And, of course, worst comes to worst, you ignore them. That's the only other option. People panic a lot about trolls, but deciding to take our roleplay out of the public arena is not the answer. It is really not the answer. That has been a core thing of any of my events I have ever been hosting or involved with planning, all the way back to those Aleport bazaars. All of my events are in public areas. They are not in housing districts. They are not in houses. They are in public areas within the game.
And that's actually something that I was really looking forward to talking with you about, is not only the Eorzean Event Committee, but a lot of the events I've seen on Gilgamesh, several of which you've been a part of, go figure. I've noticed that there is a lot of not just setting up the inside of a house for the event or the front yard of a house for an event, but I've noticed that there are role players who actually go to various parts of Eorzea and really try and incorporate the landscape that's already there into their role play. And could you talk about that a bit? I mean, how do you scout out places across Eorzea and go, oh, hey, this would be good if we hosted an event here later? Or is it more, we have an event in mind, does anyone know anywhere in the world that we could host this event at?
See, ultimately that ends up a little from column A, a little from column B. In regards to the shady markets, I and several others, we scouted out as a group various places around Eorzea, specifically sticking to ARR areas as much as we could, because we want to allow those who are brand new to RP to join in, and people who might have characters they've created just for role-playing to be able to come and join in, so they don't have to worry about leveling up those characters to get them to far away places in the world. But for Shady Markets especially, we fully scouted out areas to the point where we took notice of whether there were guards near. And in the case of certain places like Uldar, we took notice if there were guards near and then considered, could said guards be easily bribed, yes or no? When it came to the Eorzean Event Committee events, some events it was the case of we had the idea first and then scouted out a location. The Winter Market would have been one of those. The Carnival of Souls was another. Other events we had looked at an area. Our newest event actually had that, where we'd seen an area and thought this would be a good place to host something. We haven't hosted anything here, and then came up with the event afterwards.
Now, at the start of the episode, I briefly described the EEC in my opening skit and essentially said that it was a group of people from different free companies who came together to host events. As a member of the planning committee for that, I'm sure that you can give a better description than I can about the group. And I think I'd like you to describe this group in your own words, if you wouldn't mind.
So that's a little bit complex, because the Eorzean Event Committee, this is technically its second iteration. It had an initial iteration back when we were restricted to our own worlds. We didn't really have the option to do world travel, where we started the Eorzean Event Committee as a mostly in-character sort of concept, and that was started by Iris Whitewillow. As for why we were planning and hosting certain types of events, we later brought back the Eorzean Event Committee as a concept after the Aether Hub had been created, and was primarily at the time admins and mods from the Aether Hub Discord as a way that we could try and bring roleplay to all of the different servers. That has been another part of the EEC's concept, is to have our events hosted on different servers, so that each server gets an event eventually and gets some recognition, so that there is no true hub server on Aether.
So you would say that your primary objective with this group then is really to spread roleplay throughout the data center as much as possible.
Yes, spread roleplay, specifically public roleplay, throughout the data center as much as possible.
And why do you feel that it's important for more people to take part in roleplay? Why get so enthusiastic about spreading roleplay across the data center?
See, it's not necessarily even getting more people involved, it's getting those that are already involved in roleplay to be comfortable with role-playing in public, understanding that they don't need to hide away, it doesn't need to be kept in private areas, it doesn't need to be in homes all the time, it can be out in the public, that role-players have as much right to use the game and its environments as any other player does. And as for spreading it across the data centers, when the Aether Hub was first created, there was a lot of talk in the background about, well, we should probably declare a hub server. You know, this is the primary server that people should be role-playing on. This is the place that people should meet up. But the thing is, because a lot of these roleplay communities had existed prior to the world travel to the Aether Hub, you couldn't declare a server like that because everyone had their communities already on their servers. It would have been incredibly unfair to give recognition to one community over any other. It would have been saying that these other communities are not worth as much, that their efforts don't mean as much. So it felt very important to sort of spread it out to say, okay, look, recognize that there is something worthwhile on each of these places. The idea of other people joining in is just icing on the cake.
And that's really fascinating to me because I feel like when 14 started, before we had data center travel and world travel, you definitely had several people, several players, but also you had magazines, online journals, and such that covered 14, trying to say, well, this server is for this server is for this server is specifically for this. If you want this, go to this server. And I remember there being a surprising amount of pushback on that, of people going, well, yeah, you know, if you want a lot of rating or you want role play, okay, sure, you have a quote-unquote centralized server, but also every server already has those things. And also, if, for instance, you're a role player, well, if Gilgamesh is full, you can either spend months hoping that Gilgamesh opens up, or you can end up feeling kind of left out and almost discouraged to roleplay if you weren't on Gilgamesh. And I think that ended up being more of a problem than it was helpful.
It's interesting to hear you say about Gilgamesh, because these days I tend to hear most people think of Gilgamesh as a raiding server. But it's very true that in the early days, Gilgamesh was considered a role-playing server. There was Balmung, and the secondary one that we were told about was Gilgamesh. And because Balmung was originally open only to those who had played 1.0, a lot of us, including my RP partner and I, went to Gilgamesh because we couldn't go to Balmung. You simply weren't allowed to play on Balmung.
I think it's interesting because originally there was actually a time where I wanted to move to Gilgamesh because of roleplay, but Balmung was closed, Gilgamesh was closed, and so on one hand it ended up being a little discouraging, and on the other hand it kind of forces people to go, well, I guess we're just going to roleplay here and get over it.
Mm-hmm. I can fully agree on that. I would say in many ways when they had the data center split and Balmung and Mateus, which by that time had also become heavily known for roleplay, were moved to Crystal, there were a lot of people who thought, oh, roleplay on Aether is going to be gone, we should move to Crystal. There was a lot of pushback and people who said, no, we're staying on Aether. And I think in many ways the roleplay on Aether became better for that because people pushed to make sure there was still roleplay on Aether, that effort was put into these things.
The thing that I will always find ironic about that is how big of a factor the issues with housing in 14 played in regards to people moving to Crystal versus staying in their current servers, because I encountered at least a few people that were like, well, I'd move to Crystal because I hear that, more roleplay is going to happen there. But also, I already have this large house and I really don't want to lose that because getting another one's going to be horrid.
I will admit that for myself and for my FC, housing did come into it. We had housing. It seemed pointless to let go of that housing and then not be able to get anything instead of it. Aside from that, there were other FCs that we were involved with who were staying, and a little bit of it was sheer stubbornness and wanting to prove that no, the people who were saying, oh, it was going to be dead and there was nothing going to be left on Aether were wrong. But housing did play a part. And
So
housing still plays a part now, I'll admit, because you said about the idea of moving to Gilgamesh. There are a lot of players who, to this day, are reluctant to move to Gilgamesh because it is one of those servers that housing can be very difficult to come by.
I remember there were even some pretty high profile players on Gilgamesh who, try as they might, people talk about, well, if a player is really well known, notoriety can help you get a lot of things, but housing is not one of them in 14.
It wasn't even before the lotteries, and now with the lotteries, it certainly isn't.
Ultimately, I don't think anyone expected it, but maybe housing is the great equalizer in Final Fantasy XIV in that it's horrible for everyone.
I recall a time of having to stay up for 23 hours to get a small house so I could switch it to my current main. Yes, it is most definitely the great equalizer, and it is indeed horrible for everyone.
I will never forget when the new housing came out in Stormblood, and oh gosh, me and my free company, there were like 10 of us. We had all farmed all of this gil, and we're all trying to get into these highly congested servers, and it was an experience, a horrid experience, but it was certainly an experience.
I will say, even the
Yep.
most recent lotteries have been an experience. This year, finally, after so many years of wanting one, finally got to live my dream when it came to housing and actually managed to get a large house for myself. And that was an absolute experience. There were other friends and FC members alongside me who were trying to get houses in this same new ward, and the amount of anxiety, the amount of emotions that were going on between people for that. One of my FC mates described being chased off by people at certain houses where they were sort of quite angry about the fact that my FC mate was even looking at the house that they were trying to bid on. It is still invokes an awful lot of emotion for people. I was incredibly lucky. I considered that I was probably going to have luck because that particular lottery ended on my birthday. And lo and behold, out of 4 people who bid on that house, I managed to win on my birthday. was a great birthday present, honestly.
I imagine so. Now, we got a bit off topic, but, housing. Run me through the history of the Eorzean Event Committee. Who are the main people that make up the group, and how did you all come together?
Well, I would say out of the current crew that we have, there are 2 of us who have been with it from the beginning, which is myself and Iris Whitewillow. We are both from Gilgamesh. One of our other current coordinators is a lady by the name of Shizu. She was also in the original iteration of the Eorzean Event Committee, albeit she may have been under a different name at that point, because she was also a Gilgamesh player. As I'd said previously, the first iteration of the Eorzean Event Committee was created on Gilgamesh after we had already come up with a few seasonal events that we were doing. It seemed like an in-character concept to have people who were funding and planning these events alongside our actual out-of-character planning. The second iteration, as I said, came about during the Aether Hub and consisted of a few different admins and mods from the Aether Hub. Included in that was myself and Iris Whitewillow. There was also Zashul Abaddon, who was from Fairy, and I believe Oriana of Genova was involved at that stage as well.
What kind of events does the committee host? Are these usually the same events rotated based on time of year, like the 14 seasonal events? Or do you try and have unique events every season?
So we try to host the same events annually that are, yes, rotated and based upon the actual seasonal events that Square Enix has for the game. The first and foremost of those being the Winter Market, which this year will be running for the 7th year. What we do try to do, though, is have unique little events and mini sort of occurrences that will happen at these events. We like to change up what is available at them so that people can have something a little bit different each time.
So could you briefly run us through the schedule for these events and what each event is kind of like and what takes place there?
Right, well, if we're going from the beginning of the calendar year, the first event that we would have is the Festival of Love, which is our Valentine's event. The original precursor of this was we had a Valentine's mixer that occurred in 2019, apparently. The Festival of Love itself started in 2020. And the Festival of Love, the main occurrence we have during that one is we like to host chocobo jousting on one of the 2 days. That may eventually become 3 days, I don't know, but either way, 2-day festival, and we like to host chocobo jousting as something that people can do. There's usually also something like speed dating is a possibility. There's maybe a costume contest. It can vary what the other day might have. Frequently, we've had a play on the other day, which has been quite entertaining.
I'm sorry, chocobo jousting? Can you give more detail about that, please?
Well, a lot of it is going to be based on the /random rolls, but we have an announcer who puts a lot of the work into it, and he really does make the chocobo jousting quite a show. That announcer is Hassan de Grino. He is absolutely amazing. We have our 2 chocobo jousters standing either end. We'll have them run towards each other, and they'll do their /random roll to see if the other is who actually scores a hit. Certain rolls mean that they might knock off the opponent or fall off themselves. We had one person in the last one that we had where they rolled so low themselves that they decided that their chocobo took flight and just flew off out of the event. It was quite amazing. A lot of it is based on how people decide to write out their posts for it, and it can be incredibly entertaining. If the players are new and are not so good at writing out the posts themselves, our announcer is very good at coming up with something to cover what's going on as well. It can be incredibly entertaining. We usually let people sign up to joust during the earlier part of the event, and we do have prizes for the last jousters who manage to finish out on the tournament. We do award prizes for them, usually chocobo barding.
Now, before we talk about other events, I have to ask, did the chocobo come back?
Well, they flew off with the person on top, and
Oh.
I don't think he came back for the remainder of that festival, though the player may have returned on another character.
So the chocobo took off, and they haven't been seen since.
I mean, I'm sure they've been seen since, but not at that event and that day. They were gone. I believe I've seen them since at a ball at some point, so they must have come back eventually. They landed somewhere.
I want to now find this player and ask them what Muricidia was like. All right, so we have our early in the year event, and then what comes next?
The next one on the calendar would be our Hatching Tide event, which that one also, apparently, that one started in 2019. The first Hatching Tide event was called the Aether Data Center Egg Hunt. So it's very obvious what the primary focus of that one has always been. Though,
I assume it was going and slaying Void Scent.
Clearly, yes. Though I will say our egg hunt has never actually been directly an egg hunt. It has been where we would have players designated who would go and hide. This is throughout, I believe it's Central Shroud that we host this particular one in. And we have players who go and hide. They are given a token. People are given a time limit in which to find as many of these people as they can. When they find someone, they get given their token. They turn in their tokens at the end of it. And prizes are awarded for how many people you found and how quickly. We have maintained that part of the event since the original one. The event itself has expanded to 2 days, as it started originally as 1 day, and has now included other things. So the most recent iteration of it had a Chocobo Parade, which was basically a costume contest where we were judging on both how people had dressed their chocobos and how they had dressed themselves. So they were getting extra points if they matched well and things like that.
And for anyone listening thinking, hide and seek in 14, is that really fun? Trust me on this, it is a blast.
It is incredibly fun, and I'll say one particularly proud point I have about the last hide and seek event. The last one that we had, we always maintain one rule that it has to be somewhere that you can get to without flight. Flying is not allowed, because of course now you can fly in those zones. It has to be somewhere you can get on foot. By mount is reasonable, but we will generally say on foot because we expect our seekers to do the entire thing on foot rather than on a mount. And this year, there was not a single seeker who found every single one of the hiders. The one hider they couldn't find was in fact myself, in a golden bunny outfit, of all things.
Well done.
And nobody found me. I will say it was a very devious spot, and given that nobody found me, I may well use that very devious spot again. We shall see.
Now, just to be clear, I assume that no flying is allowed because if the Seeker's chocobo all end up flying away, you can't finish the event.
Well, that, and of course, a newer player won't necessarily be able to fly. It would be an unfair advantage. The same as mounts aren't allowed because some people might have the mount speed boosts that you get from having done certain quests, and not everyone will. It's best to have an even playing field.
I think that's great that you guys take that into consideration.
That's, again, the same as why we make sure our events are hosted in ARR areas. We want them to be open to as many people as possible.
So, what comes after Hatching Tide?
After Hatching Tide is what was previously termed the Summer Festival, and this year was termed the Summer Jamboree. The summer event was first hosted in 2020 and then sort of disappeared off of our roster for a couple of years, but came back this year with great success, I would like to think. Originally, that particular event was a 2-day event. This year it became a 3-day event, and This was actually the first year that I happened to be involved with it directly, because that one had previously been fully Iris's event, and I, due to weather conditions where I am, had not really been involved, as I tend to partially hibernate during summer. It gets far too hot to do otherwise. But this year I was fully involved with it. That particular event, we have generally tried to have a cooking contest, which we had again this year. We had one of our new coordinators in training, Kai Lin, hosted the cooking contest, and I would say made it incredibly fun. We also had a costume contest, and I was standard there, swimsuits and other summer-themed items. And this year we had what was known as Water Wars, which was a tug-of-war contest, basically. I am very sad to say that the character I entered into the tug-of-war lost to their opponent relatively quickly. I was quite mad about that. Though I made sure, as it was my Eorzean character who was smoking, he had his priorities straight. He made sure that he dropped his smoke, and then from the water called for his girlfriend to go pick it up for him. Priorities, you know?
And I assume the tug of wars, I've noticed a lot of the things that happen at these events tend to be random rolls and then role playing off of your role, kind of like in D&D.
Yes, things where they are going to have random elements like that will always be using /random rolls, potentially with certain dice numbers occasionally. This time it was, death rolling is what it's called. So you start with one person rolling a number, and then the other one has to roll their dice to whatever that number was, and it'll keep going till somebody rolls a 1.
Oh, wow.
Which meant that on the last few rolls, you could keep going for a while. In fact, my opponent and I kept rolling 2 for a good while. Until finally, I unfortunately rolled my 1, and there it was.
And then priorities set in.
Exactly. We also like to do, as you can see, a lot of the sort of the costume contests and things like that. Something where you can have a panel of judges and give people prizes based on their creativity. The cooking contest was something similar, although it was a little bit more complicated. That was based on writing creativity in this case. And whether we considered if the actual dish they were making would be tasty and would, in fact, be something that the characters the judges were playing would enjoy as well. I felt quite sad when there was at least one dish that I myself would have judged quite highly, but my character most definitely wouldn't have, because my character couldn't handle the spice. I will say this is not my main character. My main character is from Uldar, after all. I would hope he can handle spice. This was my Ishgardian character, who, on the other hand, certainly cannot.
No! Oh, gosh. I have to ask, before we go on to the other events, obviously a lot of stuff at these events is based on random and then role-playing off your roles. What about people who aren't on PC and might have to type in on the PS4 or PS5? And obviously that can take a bit, and I think some people might be apprehensive. Are people usually pretty patient in waiting for console players at these events?
Generally, yes. We also have it so that if usually when there are things like the roles going on, we will make sure that there is either a party chat or a cross-world link shell, some sort of way that we can communicate with the players involved. Sometimes the players might say that they do not want to roleplay it out themselves. That is part of why we have an announcer, so that they can jazz it up a little bit for the people watching. But usually, yes, we would be very patient for PlayStation players. As it is, one of our coordinators, Iris, is a PlayStation player and still manages very well. And our announcer, Hassande, is also a PlayStation player, and none of the announcements and the commentary he comes up with are pre-planned. All of it is off the cuff, based on what he is seeing at that time, at that moment.
That's awesome. I'm really glad it brings that consideration.
I envy that skill, I will say, as well.
The improv?
The ability to improv and come up with the sort of things that he does, even while he's on a PlayStation rather than a PC, is impressive.
Having been at some of these events, I couldn't agree more. So, what happens after the Summer Jamboree?
After the Summer Jamboree, originally it would be the Carnival of Souls, which began in 2020. Oddly enough, you'll notice a little bit of a pattern there that a lot of our events more officially began in 2020. I think all of us can kind of understand why that was. 2020 was a hard year for a lot of people, and I think people needed something to do. Us as organizers needed something to do, but the community needed things to do as well. So a lot of these events came about then. The Carnival of Souls came about based off of a sudden random idea that sprang to mind for me about having something that was a carnival/circus, and that is our Halloween event, Carnival of Souls. I will pause that just for a second there, because that would usually have been our next event. Though this year we are going to be introducing a new one that should be occurring around August, which is Mogtoberfest. Yes, I know the name implies that it would be October, but, well, nope, it's August. We've already got something in October. We can't have two, thank you very much. That'd be far too much work.
And we will be getting into those here later in the interview. So, we've talked about Carnival of Souls, and then do we loop back to the winter market at that point, or is there another event between those two?
There is not another event between those two at the moment, because we're at this current time we're trying to keep a 2-month gap between them. So we have the Festival of Love in February. We have the Hatching Tide one is roughly in April. We have the Summer Jamboree is in June. The Mogtoberfest will be in August. We then have Carnival of Souls in October, and we have the Winter Market in December.
All right. Now, what kind of people usually come to these events? What is the atmosphere like for those that haven't attended? I myself have seen quite a bit of unique turnout. I mean, everything from, people who just showed up and are curious about roleplay to seasoned role players. I've seen playwrights, as you mentioned, and I've even seen some fortune tellers there.
So fortune tellers are a very common thing at our events. We have an awful lot of people who like to do fortune telling, even more at the Carnival of Souls, which is not surprising given it is carnival/circus themed. It practically calls for that. I will say the Carnival of Souls tends to specialize in a lot more games than the rest of them, which again makes sense given the theme. We get a lot of fortune tellers. We get a lot of people selling all sorts of different things, because the core of all of these events is that there is a market, there is places for people to be able to sell different things, whether those be items that are made in game or whether those are completely role played, can vary on the person. We have a lot of food and drink vendors in that regard who like to sell their wares and like to advertise their venues that way. We have bards quite frequently. Some of them can be wandering ones, some of them will perform on stage. That can vary. We had at least a couple of times we've had dancers. And yes, we definitely get all sorts of role players, from the incredibly seasoned role players to people who are brand new. We had this year at the Summer Jamboree a player who seemed to be quite new to the entire thing of role playing, and generally people were very patient with him and encouraged him to join in. He joined in all of the contests and events that he could, and had great fun with them from what we can tell. It might not have been quite the skill of some of the other players, but that didn't matter. It was still, he was having fun, and we judged him not based on his role-playing skill, but based on what he was trying to go for, especially when he joined in with the cooking contest.
Oh, cool.
Quite frankly, I quite liked the idea of his dish, and so I rated it accordingly.
Now, I do want to take a moment to sort of put in some information here. For those listening in North America, you might wonder, well, why is every event market themed? And I want to help explain that a little. There is historical context here. In a lot of places throughout the world, holidays started out as every town, well, most towns, especially larger ones, would have a town square. And during the holiday season, based on, what produce and such was available at the time, but also because these holiday events attracted people to these capital towns from all over an area, all over a province, markets were usually a very key part to most holidays. Not so much these days with the advent of things like Walmart and, a lot more emphasis on holidays being put on things like vacation or, staying at home and watching something on TV. But for those of you curious about why the focus on markets, I just wanted to help put in some historical context for this.
I will say from the EEC's point of view, the reason for markets is because it does offer people that way to show off their venues, to advertise what their characters can do, and in part because the first of our events was the Winter Market, which was based on traditional Christmas markets around the world.
Now, what goes into planning these events? I mean, how far ahead do you all do it? I know that it sounds like you have a schedule planned, obviously, but you've talked about there being some scouting, some new events talked about. Is there a lot of last minute stuff at this point, or how far in advance do discussions begin?
Quite frequently, we'll at least talk about certain things regarding the next event the moment the current one is over. Certain things. So we've at least had this time little bits of mentioning about Mogtoberfest and what we're going to do for it. But there is always a lot of last minute things to handle every time, because there are always going to be new acts that are occurring, new little games, new vendors that might be turning up. There is always last minute cancellations, last minute people who can join in. Every time there are last minute things. One of the winter markets, in fact, the one that featured an EWF match, that particular match was written that very day. I think we had about an hour before the event started to get that written and planned out and ready. So yes, there is always last minute things no matter what, every time. But overall, we usually begin planning perhaps about a month in advance, where we'll first sort of see if there are people who are interested in joining in and perhaps get a little bit of the advertising stuff planned out, at least, if not put out there for people. The initial stage is usually about a month in advance, hence why the every 2 months is ideal for us.
And how do you advertise these events? Is that something that you're involved in? Or is that another member who usually handles that sort of thing?
Usually, I am quite heavily involved in it. The Summer Jamboree, not so much. That has always been the case with the Summer Jamboree. I do not handle the advertisement for that one overly, although I still put up the advertisements in certain Discords, which I realized today while looking for the history of the events we've planned, that the advertisements that went into both the Eorzean Black Market and the Aether Hub Discord, every single day there was a spelling error that nobody else noticed, and I didn't notice. Instead of being Jamboree, we were Jamabree. Absolutely beautiful, but there you go.
And it was
Never
the
mind.
best Jamobrie ever.
Clearly, yes. But usually I've been quite heavily involved in the advertising. I make a lot of the posters. The winter market ones have usually been something I've made. Sometimes they are things that I've drawn. Sometimes we have commissioned people to do drawings for us. Sometimes they are cobbled together from free GIFs and images that you can get. And yes, I'm sorry, I will call them GIFs, not GIFs. I will die on this hill. It's varied on those posters. This year, the poster for the winter market, well, the last year rather, was made in a little bit of a hurry. So I came up with the concept of having a color your own Chompy, and the one that was used as the advertisement poster was colored by Chompy and his brother Snappy, who is his younger but larger raptor brother. So it was mostly a scribble of color over something that looked like a coloring book. It was entertaining, at least, and worked as a quick poster. I think the Summer Jamboree is the only one where I haven't been involved at all in making posters for them.
Instead of GIF or GIF debate, have you ever just considered calling them moving GIFs?
I haven't, but that's an interesting thought. Though I will point out that the ones I'm using are not the moving kind.
All right. So you've name dropped it twice so far. What is Mogtoberfest? What is planned? And can you sell us on attending Mogtoberfest?
Well, the ultimate idea of Mogtoberfest is Well, it's exactly what people would think it is if they're thinking of Oktoberfest. It is going to be a harvest festival, and of course, it is going to have at least some amount of focus on drinking. Is there probably going to be something like a drinking contest or some sort of bar crawl of a sort? Even if that's a crawl from vendor to vendor? Probably. Something along those lines. We haven't decided the exact situation of what will be happening, but it will be focusing on drinking. It will be focusing on the various venues that happen to host bars. So we hope that the various venue owners can really sort of show off what they do and what makes them special, what makes them individual. It's aside from that, as I say, we'll have the sort of harvest festival feel. We're still feeling out exactly what's going to be involved, but there will of course be games, there will of course be a market. And one of the unique things that I know my fellow coordinator Iris Whitewillow is thinking of is that we may end up having the hosts or coordinators dressed in Moogle outfits, to my deepest shame and her absolute elation, because she absolutely adores Moogles.
Poor Moogles. They did nothing wrong. Aside from, all those fetch quests in Heavensward we don't talk about.
As long as they don't drink all the alcohol at this one, I'm sure we're fine. But my goodness, the idea of having my character dressed in a Moogle outfit. Oh, God.
Canonically, they drink about as much as a Limson sailor, if not more. It's ridiculous.
Exactly. So, in all honesty, a festival named after them that is at least partially dedicated to drinking seems about right.
Yeah, actually, the more I think about it, the more that makes sense.
This also actually gives us the opportunity to have another festival that's hosted in Limsa, which will be a nice thing. And it means that we can designate one of the other servers that we have not yet hosted an event on as the place to host it. Thinking on it, we currently have our Carnival of Souls is on Sargatanus, the Winter Market is on Gilgamesh, the Festival of Love is Genova, the Hatching Tide event is on Cactuar, the Summer Jamboree is on Fairy. So for all we know, Mogtoberfest could be on Adamantoise. We shall see.
If it is, then tell you what, if it is, I will participate as staff.
Excellent. That's a reason for us to decide on Adamantoise, clearly.
That is, I'm going to do it for the server. That's my selling pitch. Not only is it my favorite server and my home server, I'm definitely not biased, but if it is on Adamantoise, let me know, and I will assist at the venue as staff.
Which means, as staff, you will also be likely required to dress up as a Moogle.
That's right. And that's incentive for those of you listening. If you want to come see Nobu as a Moogle, well, now's your chance. I don't know specifically why someone has ever thought, man, I'd love to see the host of this podcast dressed up as a Moogle. But there we go. There we go. Just for you, dear listener. All right. So I have in the show notes a link to the EEC's card where you guys put all of your event information. Obviously, with the Summer Jamboree or Jamboree, depending on how you want to phrase it, having just wrapped up, it's still on that. When can people start looking forward to seeing information about Mocktoberfest appearing on that link?
It will probably be the latter part of this month, if not the start of next month, as most likely it will be hosted near the end of August.
All right, that takes care of my next question of when can we expect this event. I will do my best on my social media to keep our listeners updated on things. And when the card's updated, let me know, and I will gladly drop a link to it on my social media, and I hope I'll see a lot of you there.
And do.
Well, I feel like we've covered a lot this episode. We've definitely dived into the Eorzean Event Committee, and for those of you listening, I really hope that this has been very convincing about why you should come check out their events. But while I still have my guest here, do you have 2 questions for me to wrap up the episode?
Well, I'll say it took a little bit of thinking to come up with anything, but we might as well stick with the generalized theme here. So, do you have a favorite of the in-game events?
I love Starlight Celebration. I am such a sucker for it every year because the storylines are so cute. The outfits are adorable. Starlight, in my opinion, always has, well, not always, but usually has these really fun mini games. And also, just outside of 14, I'm a really big fan of the winter season and Christmas holiday. And so when Starlight comes in 14, I just get really excited for it. I mean, I'll dress up and change out my usual glamours, and usually I'll do the event the day of the patch, if not the following day, which I know that is an obvious thing to some people, but for those of you that game with me, I am so slow when it comes to new patches, especially with events and MSQ. I just completed the new MSQ a few days ago, and that patch has been out for a little bit. So I feel like that's kind of a statement that when it comes to Starlight, it's a must play for me.
If it wasn't obvious, I can fully understand your enthusiasm. There's a reason why the winter market was the first of our events, because I was equally enthusiastic about Starlight and about the winter season. So I fully understand all of that for sure.
The
When it
storylines are just so good on Starlight,
They are,
and the
they are.
music.
And usually the items that you can get are very nice as well. I've quite enjoyed the mounts, especially when they've given those to us. The snowman mounts, especially one year, our winter market was ending on a time when there was going to be maintenance. So at the end of that winter market it was the year that the snowman mount had come out, and in the end we organized a slow walk in the snowman mounts to the gates of Ishgard, and it was absolutely hilarious. We then played a game of Last Snowman Standing, and we had one of our members reporting to us, Hawk Nightstar, that they had been the last snowman standing, and they took picture evidence of it.
One year on Adamantoise, I organized a server-wide big snowball fight in Corthus, and it was so fun. I asked people on other servers to make alts and come attend, and I told them that like I will help them get through some of the opening stuff of ARR if they wanted, and we had a bunch of people show up, and we actually did have some people that were very nice and showed up as vendors, but a lot of people showed up and we started throwing snowballs at each other and just acting like giant goofballs, and it was so much fun.
I will
And it was
admit
in that
that
Starlight spirit.
I will admit that generally every year, whether it's planned or not, that has been part of the winter market as well. A snowball fight is inevitable. I will admit to being one of the primary culprits of starting said snowball fight as well, because it's
Because
fast
you
and
have
fun.
to. You have
Exactly.
to. That is the
Exactly.
spirit of the season.
Precisely. And we have people who do some wonderful interactions based on that.
All right. And your
I've-
second question.
As my second question, if you have actually been to any of our EEC events, do you have a favorite amongst them?
So, what I'll say about that is if I did not love EEC events to the level I do, I would not be trying to promote them on this podcast. I think they're great. I think that other people should attend and hopefully they will find them great as well. But that being said, I do have a bias, and some people would expect that to be the winter market after our long conversation just now. But I actually think that the best event you guys put on is Carnival of Souls. Because as much as I love 14 and the writing for events and such, 14 has a rating to it, and they have to be considerate of everyone, and there are certain limitations that come with that when it comes to plot writing. Now, when it comes to, for instance, private role plays or player-hosted events, there tends to be a little bit more flexibility with that. And occasionally, not darker as in, more violent or more horrible things, but darker as in a bit more eerie, a bit more creepy themes when it comes to people's role plays, as well as, for instance, plays put on and the themes behind those. And I enjoy getting into the spooky vibes at Carnival of Souls, and even just the name, it has that nice kind of spooky atmosphere to it.
I will say it is an absolute pleasure to hear you've enjoyed the Carnival of Souls so much, because as with Winter Market, those two are what I would class as my babies. They are the ones that I primarily came up with and promoted, though I have definitely had help with both of them. Zashul was a great help for the first Carnival of Souls, and obviously Iris White Willow has helped throughout those. And you mentioned the plays for the Carnival of Souls. Amusingly enough, for both of the two plays that have taken place at the Carnival of Souls, because I have many alts, I played the villains for both of those plays, funnily enough.
I'm starting to sense a theme with you, but I can't quite put my finger on it. Let me stroke my beard until I figure out.
Don't forget to curl your mustache as well.
Oh, right, obviously. Obviously. People can't see it, but assume I have a long mustache and beard, and I'm doing stereotypical bad guy things right now with this facial hair that I don't have.
I will say, being stereotyped as the bad guy has sometimes gone into how people will treat me as a player, but I've grown used to it and it's fine by this stage. I still enjoy playing the characters like that regardless.
See, I say that especially at the Carnival of Souls, just lean into it. Anyone find someone who's, on the ground using play dead emote, just chime up and be like, "Oh, that was me, sorry." Or was it? And then go back to mustache stroking.
I mean, at the Carnival of Souls, my main character is dressed up as the devil. I mean, come on, you can't get much further. And the particular game that I offer is usually the forfeit is indeed your soul. So just saying.
We'll see. I mean, we've already got the evil figured out right there.
We figure out the spooky by the fact every single year we've hosted the Carnival of Souls, we have a ghost show up. The Carnival of Souls has its own little backstory behind it, and oddly enough, some reason the ghost from that backstory, she's shown up every year. Don't know how, don't know why, but there you go, every year.
And see, the best part is, if someone disconnects, did they really DC, or did something happen? Okay. Well, I really appreciate you taking time to be here today. This was great, and thank you so much for giving us more information about all of these wonderful in-game events.
I've been more than happy to. It has been a great time, great fun.
I hope that all of you listening will go check these out. I have a few closing thoughts for this episode, but with that, I think that I will say bye to our guest, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you. You as well. Do take care.
Well, I hope you all enjoyed learning not only more about Talan, but also more about the Eorzean Event Committee. Following our interview, we talked a bit, and he said something that really stuck out to me that I wanted to share with you all. The thing that makes this unique, and by that I mean what the event committee does, is that doing this in the open air of the world of 14 it creates a situation where you don't have all the glitz and the glam and the sort of wall dressing that you do when having an event inside a free company house or a private home. It helps not only make you have to step up your role playing to a degree, but also helps emphasize the role playing itself. Since you have less visual clutter and less visual distractions, you're really forced to rely on your own typing skills and also the environment around you. And that adds more depth to it, which is something really unique. and something that only helps make these events even better. Now, with all that being said, I would like to start off by saying Happy July to everyone. I know a lot of you will be listening to this July 2nd through July 5th, so I hope that this is a really good and really positive and productive month for you. Also, for those of you that are playing Final Fantasy XVI, I hope you're enjoying it. I have so far seen mostly positive reviews in regards to it, and it seems like a lot of the listeners of this podcast who have the game so far are liking it. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on it in DMs and what you guys think about it. Finally, I wanted to wish everyone going to FanFest in Vegas a very wonderful time. While I'm not attending, I know a lot of people are, and a lot of people are looking forward to it, and I hope that you all have a blast. I know Synodic Scribe will be there in full cosplay, so if you see him, say hi. Maybe give him a bottle of water. He'll probably need to find a way to stay hydrated with all of that clothing on. But also, all of you, stay hydrated, be careful of the heat, and most importantly, have a good time. Alright, well, until next time, I hope you all stay safe, and I'll see you then with a warm drink and wonderful guests. Take care, everyone.